thank you again, everybody, for joining. And today, we are doing a lunch and learn on the topic of AI hiring and flexible work. This event is sponsored by Dayforce and SmartHRCheqs. So today, I have a great privilege of introducing you to two incredible visionaries and founders, and they will be guiding us through this webinar. We have Mario and Dominic. Welcome, and thank you guys both for your time. Would you guys like to say a few words before we kick this off? Dominic, would you like to go first?
That's great. Thanks so much, Ryan. And thanks so much, everyone, for being here. Dominic Esposito, I'm the general manager of Dayforce FlexWork. FlexWork is Dayforce contingent labor platform and division. And our goal is to help you enable your own business with an extended workforce to complement your internal employees. 10 years in the industry of temp staffing and contingent labor, know it well, know all the challenges, and experienced a lot of myself, both as an operator, working shifts myself, and even building technology. So really excited to share that with everyone today. Mario, over to you.
All right, thanks, Dominic. Thanks, Ryan. Excited to be here today. I've been in the investigative industry my entire professional career. I'm ashamed to say that I started when I was about 8 years old, and I'm only 25 now, so I've aged well, but excited to share my many years of wisdom on best practices today with Dominic and our partners at Dayforce.
Well, you look great for 25, Mario, I'll tell you.
I'm 26. I'm 26. We'll just
26 now. Well, awesome. So for today's agenda, Dominic's going to be going first, and he's going to be presenting and sharing how your organization can tap into local, vetted, on-demand labor in order to help you meet any fluctuations in your workforce. And then Mario will be up next, and he'll be sharing some best practices to help protect your organization from not only legal repercussions, but also your reputational risks. And mainly, helping you all create a fair and compliant hiring process. So without further ado, Dominic, if you could kindly share your screen, and we'll kick this off. And then at the very end, we are going to have an open Q&A. Feel free again to use the chat throughout the webinar. And just again, as a disclaimer, we shared it before, to redeem your $50 gift card, please reach out to either the Dayforce or the SmartHRCheqs person who invited you to join, and we'll make sure that comes out.
Great. Thanks so much, Ryan. And again, thanks so much, everyone, for being here with us today. As I mentioned, the division I oversee at Dayforce is called FlexWork. And you can get it from the name there. It's all about flexibility. We have a core vision that the future of work is flexible. And to really start and anchor us in the realities that are today, we wanted to just start with some stats that you might bring back to your company about what is actually happening across corporations that we see when we work with industry bodies kind of studying flexible work. The first here is really important, right? 31% of executives have said that often or always there is no one to cover work when someone is out on sick or leave. I'm sure a lot of us know that here personally, specifically in the frontline sector, like manufacturing, retail, hospitality, healthcare. When someone's out, we're usually just left with a vacant hole, or we have to get somebody to work overtime. So that's happening 1 out of every 3 times someone is calling out sick. Secondly, 40% of executives have said that managing a contingent workforce was their top workforce planning challenge. Again, for those maybe not as familiar with contingent, this is the idea of extended workforce. This is, team members that you're working with that you're not employing directly. You might be working with temp agencies, or have an employee of record in some cases, or even have contractors that you're working with. All of that is your contingent workforce. And we're seeing almost half of executives say it's their most important challenge that they're looking at. And finally, 65% of executives have said that they would use contingent workers if it was easier to find the ones with the right skills. I've been in this industry for 10 years. The platforms have adopted greatly over that period of time. And our goal is really to make contingent labor easy for your organization so that if you need an extra resource, you have the ability to get it at any period of time. And I want to just kind of articulate that problem a bit more for those who may not experience it on a day-to-day basis. But for a lot of us, by the first morning cup of coffee, say 7:02 a.m., yesterday's plan that we had around our schedule, specifically in the front line, becomes obsolete. We see this all the time, whether it's Jonathan, a retail manager, and their daycare is closed, so they've got to call out, or in the distribution facility, mandatory OT rules have enabled Andrew to work faster here, as you can see, as the example shows here on the screen, and they have to resign because they're working too hard and they're receiving burnout. Or in a hospitality facility, an example here with Nina, who has, her roommate taking the car and life is getting in the way and she's a no-show right to the job. This is happening en masse every single day. You can go back to that first stat of around 30% of call outs are not filled, right? And so really what we want to articulate is that for those experiencing this, you're not alone in this reality. Volatility is becoming the operating reality, specifically again in the frontline industries that we experience so much at Dayforce. We have demand spikes, more manufacturing is needed and we need to get more resources on. We have supply hiccups with upstream categories that are affecting the resourcing plans that we have. For those in events or hospitality or retail, we know weather can be an effect, the actual demand and supply and our resourcing schedules, hard to exactly predict what those weather events are going to be. And in some cases across all industries, our employees just have life getting in the way in different times. And that's important. We want to make sure that they have a great work-life balance and that they do the work that they're meant to do. But at the same time, we want to make sure that our facilities are ultimately able to get staffed to the ability that they can best. And this ultimately adds up. Again, I want to make sure you have a few tidbits to bring back to your organization, but it's very hard for organizations to actually quantify the cost of unfilled shifts. And you can see on the bottom left here, even 20% of these labor costs are usually unmanaged or invisible to organizations. But there's a simple path here that I hope you can bring back to understand that these unfilled shifts will create either gaps or overtime for your individual employees, which ultimately is leading to some of the burnout and churn that you're going to see in your organization and that turnover. It's also creating a safety risk and ultimately will reduce a loss of sales for the organization as a whole. These costs all add up, and it's estimated that this cost in the US alone exceeds over $1 trillion of staffing gaps due to the lack of fulfillment and the lack of having flexibility in the workforce. And we know that it's been challenging for those who may have, tried a contingent labor platform or tried to have a contingent labor program. We know that it's very difficult to manage it with pre-existing tools and agency staff that you may be using today. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first is, centralizing a decentralized process can be very difficult. What I mean by that is all your locations or all your different unit managers that you're managing are going to be using contingent labor differently. And because it's highly decentralized, we know that at the corporate level for your HR or procurement executives, you're going to be lacking those controls to basically see your entire staff. We also know that the process to manage contingent labor, specifically again on the front line, is very difficult. You're making lots of phone calls or emails, or you're using 3, 4, 5 staffing providers and maybe some employer of records for those who are using that inside your organization. We also know that the sourcing process is very disconnected to your overall organization. You have platforms like Dayforce to manage your internal employees, but for your contingent labor, you're using multiple different platforms and spreadsheets, and it's not all connected together. And we know that, you're likely getting unreliable worker quality because you don't have the transparency to see those workers' performance on a day-to-day basis that you're bringing on a contingent basis, and you're not able to really understand all the time the exact operating procedures of these individual temp agencies or third parties you might be using to extend your workforce. And so our goal here is to really give you one platform for your total workforce. And the way that we do that is starting with your primary, your full and part-time. For those already on Dayforce, you'll know that Dayforce enables you to have a great management experience, not only in workforce management and payroll and HR for your full and part-time employees at your individual locations today. For those who are experimenting with some of the newer opportunities within Dayforce, you'll know that we also have the ability to enable your nearby employees. So if you have 100 locations, you actually can have with our Shift marketplace, the ability to enable employees to work between locations or get access to opportunities when we have callouts or no-shows. For those who are not doing that today, the nearby pool is a great pool to activate as your most immediate flexible need. What we're really going to talk about today is that contingent workforce, right? So when your primary can't fill the shift or when your nearby can't fill it, that contingent workforce of your external workers who can augment your existing team is a really important element to have inside of your organization. And I want to introduce you to 3 new different talent channels you can use in your business. Think about, these talent channels very similar to how you go about recruiting today. When you're doing your own recruiting, you're posting job ads, you're reviewing candidates, you're getting those candidates in. Well, I also want to give you some flexible ways that you can go about your different talent channels. And here are the 3. First is trusted talent. So this could be a bench of your known experienced workers who've worked in your organization, but may not be working always on a full-time or part-time basis. They may be retirees, alumni, silver medalists. You can use them in various different capacities. But I want to kind of show you here how you can access those trusted talent and create a pool of them so you can leverage them flexibly when, as we said, life gets in the way and volatility comes back into the organization. 2 is I want to tell you more about Dayforce's offering of our marketplace, where you can actually fill shifts with vetted talent that Dayforce is helping vetting in a matter of minutes. These are workers across various different industries that are ready to go and work at a moment's notice. Think about within 1 hour of a job starting time when your manager needs them. 2, I want to tell you more about how you actually can bring agencies inside of Dayforce now. A really exciting offering that we're bringing together with FlexWork is not just the trusted talent and the marketplace, but you can bring all your agency temp spend and contingent labor spend. And for those working here with procurement or your CFO, they're going to love you for this, a centralized view of all your staff in one platform. So first, just to give you a little more background on what trusted talent actually is, as I mentioned, with FlexWork now, you can actually build a pool of those engaged, vetted alumni, retirees, seasonal staff that you've worked with before, and you can actually have Dayforce act as the employer of record so that you can access those staff that you might be onboarding and offboarding at any time on demand. When you have those no calls, no shows, you need a 6-month project plan. You need to reduce, employment within your own facility, but need to extend it later on with additional capacity. You can leverage those great employees that you know and trust already. They're going to be those that deliver that consistent service for you. And ultimately, it's going to have a private talent pool that as shifts become available, can access shifts on demand. We always say to start with your trusted talent because you know them well already. Second, Dayforce now has a marketplace through what we call Ideal Talent to enable you to fill shifts with these vetted talent in minutes. These are going to be pre-screened W-2 workers across industries that have built-in background checks and certifications that your team now who are using Dayforce can enable FlexWork to access the talent on demand. So if you're at a stadium and you have a no-show, they can fill in at a cashier role. If you're in a manufacturing facility and you have warehousing challenges, or if you're in a construction or healthcare facility, you're able to backfill these talent, scroll through profiles, see talent that you need or in a moment's notice, and get real-time access to them. And the best part here is that you can actually see the worker performance, so you can get an idea of who those new trusted talent that you want to use are. And finally, for those already using contract agencies, you can bring now contract agencies into Dayforce. So if you're using temp staffing agencies across different positions, you can onboard them, they can fill your shifts, and you can actually enforce the contract rates that you have with them. So these are going to be existing suppliers that you may already have agreements with. You're going to partner with procurement inside your organization or the CFO office to bring a cost savings. The platform as a whole enables you to get about a 10% cost savings on your contract agencies. So if you're spending 10 million in contingent labor today, one of the big benefits of FlexWork is you're going to look at about saving about $1 million in implementing FlexWork, which can be used for other HR initiatives inside your business. And you're going to have this prioritization, right, of those trusted talent, the marketplace, and the contract agencies all together. And what I really want to stress here with all these new talent channels, is that we really want to give you a unified platform to a total workforce strategy so that you can flex up and down anytime you need. You'll have complete visibility by having internal and external. For so those using Dayforce today, you've already got your internal employees kind of centralized in one. Now this is going to give you a great view of that extended workforce that you may already be using or you could benefit from all in one platform. It's going to boost that efficiency because shifts that are getting unfilled, even in that moment's notice, like I said, at 7:02 a.m. when there's a change, actually FlexWork can just take that change, post it out, and get it filled by one of the flexible workforces that you enable. And that's going to enable you to rapidly fill these open shifts, right? You're going to continue to be able to have open shifts that go from being open and you're having managers that have challenges to being closed and actually being filled within a matter of minutes. The platform looks like this. It's fully mobile so that your managers can use it on the go. So again, if you have manufacturing, retail, healthcare, hospitality, logistics, delivery, a great use case for all of this contingent labor, where on mobile or on desktop, you can go ahead and order the staff. The process is really simple. You're going to go ahead and post those open shifts. You can take them right out of Dayforce, or you can have a mobile app where you just say, hey, I need, in this example, 3 bartenders on demand. You're going to get matched with those talent pools that you enable. So if you have trusted talent enabled, they're going to get the offer first. If you have the marketplace enabled with those VSF, they're going to get the offer second. And if you have your contract agencies, you can set up the order that your contract agencies actually get fulfilled staff in. And then all of time and attendance and billing and invoicing is actually centralized inside the platform so that you manage those contract rates and enforce. And you're going to be able to manage that visibility and you're going to be able to actually track budgets to actuals with not only internal labor, but contingent labor all at once. We're so excited to bring FlexWork to market. We're so excited to help you solve your contingent labor challenges. We understand that managing workforce today is getting even more challenging, and we really want to help you and your organization understand how you can bring flexibility. We've seen great results already. We have 450,000 shifts filled on the platform. There's 2 million workers sitting behind the platform. So any open shift is going to get access to 2 million workers. We're seeing great fulfillment rates, and we're seeing the ability to get this all done in less than an hour's notice. I'm Dominic Esposito again, GM of Dayforce FlexWork. If you have any questions about managing flexibility, just managing your workforce or FlexWork, feel free to reach out to me anytime. My email is dominic.esposito@dayforce.com. It will be shared out after. Also, you can connect with any of your Dayforce representatives or representatives who brought you here to connect with me after. With that, I will pass on to Mario here to give you some exciting updates on how you can actually do some AI recruiting.
Thank you, Dominic. Appreciate it, and excited to be here today. Before I kick off, I have a quick question about the platform that you have. So, if they have a contingent need, do they have to be on the Dayforce platform at the same time, or can they just subscribe to the FlexWork option if they'd like that?
Yeah, FlexWork is standalone. It's a great point. So FlexWork can operate with Dayforce to bring your internal and external together, or FlexWork can just manage your contingent labor and pair with your existing HCM platform if you have one already.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thanks, Mario.
Appreciate it, Dominic. Thank you. I know I think we've officially broken Teams or Zoom, one or the other. So we apologize if you've come to the meeting a couple minutes late. We're still working through some technical challenges. A couple of things before I start the presentation. If you have questions for Dominic or myself, feel free to post them in the chat. We will try to take a look at those today before we end. And if we can't get to all the questions, we will certainly address those and send them out to everybody. And then also, if you're sticking around for the SHRM PDC credit, the notice, the code for the credit will be posted towards the end of the presentation. So please feel free to throw questions in the chat, and then we already have some questions already, which we'll be trying to share as well. So without any further ado, I'm excited to add on to Dominic's presentation around really effective, faster, smarter, and compliant background screening. And I think in the light of today's marketplace, organizations are always faced with how do they remain agile when they're trying to add talent, but at the same time remain compliant, right? With the gig economy, with bringing in more and more talent, having the right talent that's been vetted is critical to any organization, whether it's a bartender, whether it's someone in any facility. Having confidence that you're using the best tools to screen those candidates is really important. And so for us, when we think about screening in contingent hiring, things like high volume are things that are top of mind. Having really short lead times, right? So you need to fill 3 bartender roles by 5 o'clock tonight, right? And then for each role, what is the risk um, in that particular role, and then how much screening or vetting can you do, how much can you afford to do, and then how do you deal with also the gig worker versus the standard W-2 employee, and then also cost considerations on reliability and speed of the data. So today I'm super passionate about background screening. I've been in the investigative space my entire professional career, grew up in a family-owned business doing investigations. And so this is my passion. This is what I've done my entire professional career. So I started in an industry where background screening was merely going to courthouses, pulling these giant books. For those of you that are 30 years or younger, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But back in the day, there was these giant books with criminal records, and that's how records were indexed, right? You'd have to literally pull this big book out of a big shelf and chronologically look at potential records, and then go to the court clerk and ask them to pull a file, and you would analyze that file, make copies of the records, and that's how background checks were done 30 plus years ago, right? So things have changed quite a bit, right? So we've gone from that process to more faster, automated, using technology, using AI, and with that comes risk and reward. So we're going to talk about some of those things today. So among the things that we're going to be really spending some time on today are things like the automated resume process and how application review has evolved in the wake of AI, and the candidate screening has changed significantly. Tons of options out there for not only chatbots for candidate qualification, but now agentic AI, right? Where there's a real person a chatbot that looks like a real person, an AI avatar that is essentially interacting with your candidates, right, on your behalf, so that you don't have to sit here and screen 300, 400, 1,000 resumes. It's done in a matter of hours, and now they're ranked and they're sorted, right? And then with that, once the candidate goes through the process of resume review and ranking, then it becomes, okay, now you've got a pool of candidates that you were going to start putting through that screening process. What are the options with screening, which we're going to talk through today? Things like identity verification, and then we're going to spend a little bit of time on social media, and then how records are indexed, as well as some predictive analytics for worker success, and as well as some other AI tools with continuous monitoring. So we're going to talk through the various different ways that you can use some of these tools to just be a little bit more effective in your process. So starting with really posting, sorting, ranking, and screening candidates, the reality here is at the click of a button, right, you can post a role. They can then, of course, be ranked within the ATS, right, within the space. Obviously, it can be done within the Dayforce application, and then automatic sourcing. And with that comes the agentic AI interviews, right? So agentic AI can now be trained with your company's culture, with your questions, with your key elements that are really important. And using that, we can now determine, of the 1,000 candidates, how many are actually going to get interviewed, right? So we've heard, and even now, if you look at any of the Indeed or even on LinkedIn, the common denominator is a candidate submits their name for a role, they never hear back, right? Why don't they hear back? Because talent acquisition is overwhelmed. They don't have the ability to possibly sort through 1,000 resumes or 1,000 applications to fill 5 roles. So how can technology help them? So the technology is changing at lightning speed. We just came back from an event which was heavily focused on AI around the many tools, and it was amazing to me the amount of advancement that's happened just in the last 3 to 6 months around using AI to make that process so much better and faster, but also qualitative, so that we can understand who we're dealing with. So the agentic AIs is really big, and we're seeing organizations train those agents to act, think, speak just like a representative of the talent acquisition team would. We've also started interacting with our friends at Humanly.io, and Humanly is really changing the game when it comes to agentic AI in this process. And what we're seeing is questions, interactions with a candidate to be absolutely amazing. So stay tuned for this. This is an ever evolving piece. The one warning I will share with everybody is, in doing my research for some of these presentations and just talking to other employers, there's an AI tool that candidates are actually using called Interview Copilot, and it literally sits on the candidate screen while they're being interviewed. So if you're in talent acquisition and you want to ask them a difficult question, Interview Copilot will sit in and share a teleprompter on how they're going to answer those questions. So it's actually a subscription that candidates use to be able to really get through the interview process pretty quickly, right? So that's definitely some changing in the way things are being done from the interview process. So now, if we think about biometrics, right? We've all heard about biometrics in everything we do, right? We see it when we go to airports. We see it when we're verifying identity in pretty much anything. The reality is that identity fraud is on the rise, right? So identity fraud is really something that nowadays we've heard horror stories. I got to believe, we had over 700 people register for this event. I got to believe of those that are attending today, there's probably at least 10% that have had some type of candidate fraud, right? So what is biometric identity verification really? Is it uses a live selfie capture, right, from the candidate. It compares that to their government issued ID, and within a minute or less, it ensures the very high accuracy of their verification. And really, what it does is it reduces identity fraud, right? So it's really harder for imposters to pass through that level of a background. And then it increases efficiency, right? So right away, if they skip that process, you don't even need to move any further along, right? And the other thing it does too is it enhances the candidate experience, right? So think about how biometrics works. People get scared off of the word biometrics. Well, fingerprints are biometrics, eyes are biometrics, right? Facial identity, those are all biometrics that are being used on a regular basis. So really, really, really fast tool that reduces the amount of fraud by a candidate, but at the same time, we're making sure that the person on the other end is in fact a legitimate person, right? So another way to faster, smarter, and compliant types of screening. And so one of the areas that we're seeing a huge impact in with background screening is the use of social media, right? So when you think about social media, I'm sure nobody in this call has ever tried to social media search anybody they've ever had to interview, but I'm sure a couple of you have. Some of you may even admit to it in the chat function, right? But assuming that you are doing that, right? The application of gathering information about somebody to make a hiring decision is engaging in the use of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is essentially meaning you as an employer are going out using third-party information to make a hiring decision. That process requires you to follow the FCRA. So with social media screening, we've got an amazing tool that helps employers look for things that can be used to eliminate them from the candidate pool legally for things that may not come up in a criminal background check, or things that may not come up in a potential drug test, or even in an employment verification. But we're going to find out things like substance abuse issues. Are they racist? Are they sexist? Do they engage in any discriminatory behavior? Are they involved in any kind of trolling and harassment, right? And as you can see here, criminal activity, of course, if they're engaged in something criminal and they're using social media to do so, that's a tool that you can use to keep somebody out of the organization. Not to mention, the people that are getting engaged in sexually explicit materials, photos. I mean, I have countless horror stories of employers that have used this to not hire somebody. Not to mention things like threats or acts of violence, or even potentially legal activity. And what this tool has done is it uses the advanced technology to compare up to 3 identifiers of a person before we report that particular adverse finding. And all protected class information is removed, and we're only using information on your particular candidate. So a great tool. Can't speak enough about the value of using social media for screening. It's a fairly inexpensive add-on to any background investigation, but at the same time, it tells you a really more in-depth story about somebody, and potentially somebody who hasn't been charged with a crime. This is a good way to figure out what kind of person they are, and would they be an ideal culture fit for your organization. Now we get into realities of court data and AI. we're all hearing about fast data, right? Instant searches. We're hearing about things like making sure that, background checks come back fast, right? So we want to be a little bit careful about background checks that are instant. We want to be a little bit careful about how data is gathered, because the reality is that a hybrid model, which is what we use here at SmartHRCheqs, is not only using AI, but using human to ensure that there's accuracy, fairness in the data, right? And the context of the data, and ensuring that we have transparent algorithms, right? Because you have to have, at the end of the day, the best technology in the world is not going to preclude you, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, from not being discriminatory, from following the law with respect to candidate rights, right? So this is an area that is always under constant improvement, and there's customizable controls that HR leaders can help with defining those automation thresholds, right? So in addition to that, the reality is that a lot of times court data is very sparsely populated based on area, right? So those instant searches tend to have less accurate, less current, less disposition data. And so understanding gaps in data and understanding where a search might need additional due diligence. I mean, I could spend an hour just talking about court systems around the country and accessibility based on city, county, state, federal, et cetera. So understanding where data is incomplete and court records are really important to understand how quickly you're getting an accurate result, right? Quick is not necessarily accurate, right? And accurate isn't always as quick as you'd like, but would you rather have thorough versus perhaps less comprehensive, right? And not to mention the other challenges when it comes to things like context gaps, right? So if you're using AI and misreads something, court record maybe is dismissed versus pending. That's a big deal, whether or not it can be reported, right? So not to mention things like privacy risks, sensitive data, and then just adoption hurdles, right? I was at a presentation recently where I heard that north of 40+% of HR professionals are still a little bit fearful of AI and using automation, right? So having those adoption pieces are really, really important. So just things to keep in mind when it comes to automation and using AI in data. So in talking about predictive analytics, a lot of people want to try to use predictive analytics to really determine, can you use this intelligence to help with better hiring decisions, right? Can we predict the success of a candidate, whether it's skill set, whether it's past performance? Can we predict the ability to be successful? How efficient and consistent is that? And then, do we have data-driven insights and things like, can we reduce turnover and can we have compliance-ready analytics, right? So the pros to these things are if they align with the FCRA, which is the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission standards for fair and explainable AI, then the answer is yes, right? So those are the pros with having those predictive analytics. And so when you think about in conjunction with predictive analytics, you think about things like continuous monitoring, right? So this is a new tool that helps. It's somewhat along the lines of predictive, but it's real live analytics monitoring around someone who's arrested or booked within hours of an arrest or booking, right? So what's great about this solution is it monitors alerts in real time. There's thousands of police agencies around the country that participate. And what sounds really good is that it's instant within hours. It also sounds great because it monitors ongoing arrest and criminal activity in real time. Those are the pros, right? The challenges or their cons is that, is this invasive for an employer to be notified of an arrest? And then it opens up Pandora's box around, well, you've already hired the person, you've been notified of an arrest. Now what do? You can't terminate based on an arrest. So what do? And there's a whole slew of things that we would recommend around the employee handbook, the notification of an arrest or potential violation, and the failure to do so resulting in suspension or termination from your job, right? So having that piece is really important. The compliance and legal risk, right? So what are you doing about this once you know about it, right? Are you going to take action? And then what are your legal obligations now that you know about it? And then there's a huge upside there around protecting your organization's risk and liability for not knowing, right? So it's huge exposure when it comes to negligent hiring. And then not to mention, I talked about all the great stuff with this, but how accurate is the data? Is it getting all police and booking records in the whole country? The answer is probably not. There's some regions that are not as strong as others, right? So understanding where that might be a strong tool versus not is really important. As you can see here, 96% of employers conduct background screening as a standard process. It's probably gone up a little bit more than that, but nearly 90% never bother to recheck after the person's been hired. And from our perspective, from a due diligence and risk perspective, that's not good, right? As organizations, we want to know that the people in our organizations are in fact not exposing us to more potential harm, right? So now we move on to the compliance and legal considerations, right? As employers, we have to follow some pretty standard processes. We have to follow the Fair Credit Reporting Act, right? Which has very specific requirements around release forms, disclosure, authorization, and the adverse action process, right? Long gone are the days of just saying, you know what, I interviewed Ryan, and you know what, I don't think I want to move forward with Ryan. I'm just gonna pass because something came up in his background, and I just don't think I want to move forward. It doesn't work that way, right? There's very specific requirements under the FCRA, not to mention requirements under the EEOC, which forces us to make sure that we're avoiding bias, right? And any kind of disparate impact, right? So you take that, you combine that with Ban the Box and the Fair Chance Act and the data privacy laws and AI governance. It's sort of like, whoa, how do I deal with all this, right? So having understanding of those compliance and legal considerations are really important. And the reality is that when it comes to AI, the emergence of AI has not changed the basis of compliance, right? So just because there's some great technology doesn't mean that we can just throw compliance out the window. So we still need to follow the FCRA. We still need to abide by the regulations of the EEOC to ensure that we're not facing any kind of challenges there. So that's really important to understand. When it comes to discrimination in data, what we're seeing too is we want to be cognizant of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, right? So that talks about the employers prohibiting employment discrimination based on things like race, color, religion, sex, national origin, and the screening practices have to avoid any kind of disparate impact, right? So that's really important. And then the ADA, right? We can't forget that. If you use AI to screen folks and you're potentially discriminating because of ADA, now you have another issue on your hand, right? So you have to be very careful about discrimination and the use of data. And you can't necessarily hand it off to your vendor, right? You also have to own part of that, as we'll talk about in some of the case law lessons coming up. And then the last piece is the whole GDPR piece, which we can spend probably another 20 minutes on, right? So as we start to near the next 10, 12 minutes as we wrap up, and then in the next 10, 12 minutes, I want to just spend a few minutes talking about some case law. So I'm not going to go through every one of these because I wouldn't want to bore everybody, nor am I necessarily a legal scholar by any stretch of the imagination. But as you can see here, there's been some case law around AI bias in hiring, concerns around facial recognition, EEOC involvement around age discrimination, and even algorithmic bias allegations, right? So we're going to just cover just a couple of the lawsuits. So in the Mobley versus Workday, which has been in the news for quite a bit now, the allegation here is that the plaintiff alleges, right, that this was Mobley that then created a whole class action suit, that the hiring tool that Workday provided screened out, eliminated job applicants that were over 40, right? That doesn't apply to me. I told you guys I was 25, so I would have been included in that. But it screened out any job applicants over 40, and essentially it violated the ADA Act, right? ADEA Act, Age Discrimination and Employment Act, right? And it raises the issue of whether or not the vendor, Workday, can be legally liable because its AI tool made those hiring decisions, right? It goes back to, are you cognizant of that? So here are the key developments. The court held that the claims that Workday acted as an agent survived motion to dismiss, right? The court granted preliminary collective action certification, and the case signals that employers and their vendors, right, and their AI tool vendors may face discrimination liability, right? So you can't just say, well, I engaged with this tool and they were supposed to not be discriminatory. Now, guess what? Everyone is brought into a lawsuit and they sort it out later. So what are the challenges? You're delegating decision-making. HR leaders have to ensure that the algorithmic tools are audited for disparate impact. The vendor contracts and oversight are important, and that the vendor's motion to dismiss was only partially successful, right? So that's it. So what's the key takeaway is it signals that AI hiring by using vendors and employers can be held liable both for age-based disparate decisions or impact on people that are over 40, right? So that's the big takeaway. The second lawsuit is really tied to the EEOC, which is really its amicus brief, right? So EEOC, which once again is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC is filed an amicus brief in 2024 arguing that HR software AI vendors may be employment, I should say, may be directly liable for under federal discrimination for when their automated tool makes those employment decisions. So they're basically saying, look, as a rule, EEOC is saying that in its strategic enforcement plan, which started in 24 through 2028, that discrimination through technology using AI is a priority. So all eyes are on deck. So what are the implications for this? HR has to recognize that the automated decisions, the hiring algorithms are under direct enforcement scrutiny, not just via litigation. So what they're saying is Big Brother's watching. Ultimately, you're still going to be held liable, and there's got to be transparency, explainability, bias audits, et cetera. So those are the main pieces. And the key takeaway here is that in 2024, the EEOC signaled that it will treat AI hiring tools as potential sources of discrimination liability, vendor and employer alike. So HR must in fact stay involved. So very similar to the Mobley case, it's basically saying we're going to come after you and we're going to watch that very, very carefully. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Future outlook. Contingent labor demand is rising pretty aggressively, right? 80% of employers are using some version of AI. I caution you to make sure that you are not overstepping your boundaries in doing that. And there's shifting regulations with federal, state and state AI laws. And we have to balance innovation with compliance. I would encourage us to be talking to our partners around how are they ensuring that there is no discrimination, that we're using the best technology, but we're not limiting our ability to be proactive in that process. So that's really, really important to understand. So, what are the key takeaways? Contingent labor is growing with compliance risks. Obviously, AI streamlines screening, but it does not eliminate the legal and regulatory challenges. And collaboration is really, really, really important. So I want to leave us with that and certainly spend the next few minutes around any questions that we might have. I'm going to pull up the chat here for any questions. So feel free. I can certainly pass the baton, but we can answer any questions that anyone might have. It looks like we do have some stuff in the chat here. Does Dayforce provide audit logs or explainability reports to show why a candidate was recommended or scored in a certain way? And I don't know if anybody from Dayforce, Dominic, or someone else in Dayforce wants to answer that question. That's the one question. Once again,
Yeah.
Dayforce. Go for it.
I think Ryan answered in the chat. Happy to answer, as well. But yes, as Ryan kind of alluded to in the chat, right, there's human oversight in any AI recommended processes. Happy to answer more about it. That also relates to kind of the Dayforce core offering with HCM as well.
Are there safeguards? We'll start from the bottom. Are there safeguards that prevent users from bypassing compliance checks when they're under pressure to fill positions quickly? A great question, Carson. That would be based on your organization, right? So essentially, if you define a compliance check, once you onboard a screening partner, everyone has to go through the same process. So there's not really a way to bypass it other than if they somehow decide not to put them through the system, which would be an internal control versus outside control. Looks like on the latest poll question, what is your biggest frustration with your current candidate screening provider? It's saying that communication and transparency is one issue, inaccurate results is another issue. So communication transparency, that's definitely something that we're seeing with respect to the candidate experience. And so when there's a lack of communication around why something is delayed or the inability to reach somebody live, right, that's a real challenge. and failing to communicate that level of why it's taking longer is really, really problematic to organizations. And then we also had one person have concern, a few people around the turnaround time, which is something that, of course, depends on the level of searches that you're doing and the depth of those searches, right? So that's something that you also want to keep in mind. Yeah, so basically it says, do you provide AI-driven insights into candidate fit, performance, potential, or turnover risk? So the reality is that from a screening perspective, we're only going to essentially put the candidate through a certain level of background and then report the results. Whether or not they're a risk and potential risk modeling, that's not something that's technically legally compliant from our perspective. So you do have, the candidates do have certain rights. So you have as an employer, have the ability to decide if that presents a risk. And if it does, you have the ability to follow the FCRA, which enables you to pause the hiring decision, give them a chance to refute the contents, and then decide based on their response whether or not they are going to be a fit. Looks like we had another question around, is continuous monitoring something an employer can legally use? I thought arrest could not be used for employment. Great question. So the answer is, if it's post-hire, this is a post-hire tool, so it's non-FCRA, which means that an employer is not using it to make a hiring decision. They're using it to make a retention decision. And you as an employer have a right, based on what your handbook says, to potentially suspend or take action based on whatever the employee signed on in the handbook when they were brought into the organization. So if you don't have a policy, that's where the challenge becomes around what law or what rule did that employer potentially break. This is an area that we are both organizations very passionate about, and would love an opportunity to answer any further questions thereafter. So from our side, Jake Jeline is one of our team members, and you can email him directly with any questions or anything that you might have related to SmartHRCheqs. And we can certainly you can also get in touch with me or anyone from my team as well. So appreciate the opportunity to be here today. If anyone, we still have a few minutes left. If anyone has any follow-up questions, please feel free to shout them out. And thank you for your flexibility today as far as accommodating the last minute change with technology.
Very good. Mario, Dominic, thank you all so much for your time. Please do a screenshot of the current slide. If you have any questions about SmartHRCheqs, feel free to contact Jake. My email, Ryan Schaefer, is in the chat. Feel free to reach out to myself or anybody or the person who invited you to this webinar.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We'll keep this on for until 1 o'clock, a little after. Feel free to keep answering questions along the way.